Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Recovery Wars, The Data Awakens, brought to you by Ziff Davis and Unitrends. I'm Karen Bannon and I'll be your moderator for today. We have just a few quick notes before we begin. Slides will advance automatically throughout our event, and in addition, the console you're looking at is customizable. This means you can move and resize any of the windows you see open, as well as explore those widgets at the bottom of your screen. We'd like this event to be as interactive as possible, so at this time we invite you to ask any questions you may have using the question box on the left side of your screen. Please feel free to ask about anything you hear about today, as well as anything that's going on in your own IT journey. We'll get to as many questions as we can towards the end of our event. And finally, an on-demand presentation will be available after the event, and attendees will receive a link via email. Just like the Starkiller Base and destruction go hand in hand, so do backup and recovery. Unless you can pull off some sort of Jedi mind trick with the management, it doesn't matter that you've completed your backups if you're not 100% sure that they can be recovered. A recovery plan you must have. Your first order is a powerful plan that assures recovery and protects you from the dark forces of data disintegration. And yet, so many companies don't have any plan at all. And even those that do have a plan may not test that plan that they do have. When you couple those two facts with the fact that it usually takes around 24 hours for companies to recover from a disaster, it's clear we really do have a problem. That said, in today's webinar, our expert will discuss how to build a technology-enabled DR plan based on how much data you need to recover and how fast. He'll also discuss the dark forces of disintegration, defining recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives, and recovery assurance, the right path to awakening data. And with that, I'd like to introduce our expert, Mike DeMeglio. Mike is Director of Product Marketing at Unitrends. Mike, who has more than 25 years of sales and marketing experience with startups, emerging and large public corporations, has spent time at DataCore Software, Falcon Source Software, and NetApp, among other organizations. His knowledge makes him a perfect person to discuss the topic of data recovery. And with that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Mike to get started. Mike?
Thank you, Karen. Truly appreciate that kind introduction. It always makes me sound better than I am, but appreciate that. Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar. I really would like this to be kind of a mix of fun and seriousness. And the accompanying white paper that you'll get after the webinar that you can download from the resource section of the screen here tells a story of the challenge that the Republic CIOs and their Jedi IT team faces, the devastating attacks of the First Order, and the solution proposed by the Jedi Master. So I hope that we have some fun here, but I also hope that we take away the seriousness of the real-world recovery challenges that I know everybody on the phone, all the IT folks on the phone, face today, and how we can awaken your data with assured recovery. So in the words of the famous Jedi Master, Yoda, a recovery plan you must have, yes? So as we start our new episode, hope is dwindling as the Imperial Star Destroyers of data destruction bear down on the data center planet, carrying relentless inquisitors on a hunt of unprotected data artifacts. Can Luke, the premier Jedi Master, build a recovery plan, create a force of automation, and pass his wisdom to the new Jedi team of IT warriors? Can the Republic CIOs protect their galactic data centers from the dark forces of data destruction and the Starkiller Base of the First Order? Everything may change. Are you ready to become a Jedi Master of data recovery? Choose the path wisely and awaken your data. So 30 years have passed since the destruction of the second Death Star, if you're familiar with the Star Wars trilogies, the two trilogies that have come out so far, and the fall of the Galactic Empire. The Republic's rebuilding, but a new First Order has arisen, creating great uncertainty in the Galactic Data Center. The First Order has built a Starkiller Base that can disintegrate an entire star system and all the data and its resources. So with increasing challenges, Republic CIOs worry about data corruption, revenue loss, and mounting compliance requirements. These concerns are in addition to their ongoing struggles with the dark forces of hardware failure and power disruption and catastrophic ruin. And the brave heroes of IT need new skills and strength to assure recovery in this new world of 24/7 data access, increased demand, and devious attacks from the First Order. Further, Republic CIOs recently found that they lack the intelligence needed to protect against sophisticated cyber attacks. And they continue to overlook the threats of things like ransomware and stolen credentials. So the Republic CIOs and their Jedi teams must really take into account a wide scope of factors, from weather-induced risks to the potential chaos caused by the Imperial Star Destroyers and their cybersecurity breaches. And with all of these growing needs and the growing need for 24/7 operation and the increased intolerance to downtime, the new Jedi IT Knights need to be ready to spring into an instant recovery mode at literally any time and pivot that approach when needed and keep the Republic's employees and their data protected from those dark forces of data destruction that we'll talk about today. So it's really normal to look at natural disasters as being the primary cause of IT outages. We all do that, right? We think it's hurricanes and tornadoes and fires and floods and so forth. But really, in reality, it's application problems that are the primary threat to IT uptime. Things like hardware failures, you can see from this slide that you're looking at today. Process problems cause literally 80% of unplanned application downtime. Human error, over-provisioning of storage, deleting critical files. They can all play havoc with applications. And we can't forget the increasing threats that malicious cyber attacks, the explosion of data growth, and increased complexity of N-tier applications. And when I talk, and I'll talk about N-tier applications throughout today's presentation, what I'm referring to there are more complex applications that have interdependencies on other instances, things like an ERP or an e-commerce application that depend on databases and DNS servers and Active Directory and web front ends and so forth. So all of those interdependencies need to work together. So when I refer to N-tier applications, you'll have some sense, and probably already do have some sense of what that means. And those are currently spread, as I said, across multiple platforms, multiple operating systems, physical and virtual, and it all adds to the challenge. So the result of all that is that 91%, and this has actually surprised me the first time that I saw it, it's pretty incredible, that 91% of data centers, doesn't matter the size, big or small, have experienced downtime, in a downtime event in the last 24 months. That event lasts on average for 2.2 days, and cost on average about $7,900 a minute. And if you take that 2.2 days times 7,900 dollars per minute, I did the quick math here, it's $845,000 per event. That's pretty significant when you're talking about companies of any size. When you have a disaster event, and I'm not talking about natural disasters, as you can see here, they really only represent about 7% of the overall disasters that our data centers, our primary sites, incur on a regular basis. So for those that say, geez, this will never happen to me, don't be like this stormtrooper that wished he had a DR plan in place when that second catastrophic Death Star destruction occurred. The the problem is very real, guys. I mean, that was a little fun and tongue-in-cheek, right? But the problem is real. Companies all over the world are experiencing downtime literally every day. As we saw from the last slide, they're not typically related to natural disasters. And if you don't have that recovery plan and a recovery assurance type methodology in place, the cost and damage can be literally insurmountable. So the figures that we're talking about here on this slide have come from multiple IT surveys. I mean, Forrester, Gartner, ESG, IDC, they've all done surveys. They all pretty much agree on these figures, give or take a couple percentage points here or there. And most alarming is the growing number of firms, if you look at this, that have lost an entire data center. We're talking about 25% of companies that have lost their entire data center for an hour or even multiple days. So you can imagine the effect that has on their customers, their employees, their revenue, their reputation, and on and on. And with the increasing demand for 24/7 operation that we have today, online data access, e-commerce, and other critical applications that need to recover much faster, the problem is truly real and will have a significant impact on literally every company. I don't care what size that you are, giving us real clarity as to why companies are losing confidence in their disaster recovery preparedness today. To further emphasize the catastrophic impact of downtime, and to be honest, a little tongue-in-cheek, right? Hopefully not so much, since we're trying to have just a little bit of fun here, and not just complete seriousness, but it truly is a serious subject, and it's important to understand the size of the challenge that we're looking at. While some businesses can truly survive some data loss, most, as we've been talking about, are dependent on things like electronic data exchange, long-term archives to meet the more stringent audit and compliance and regulatory requirements that we all face today. And things like we talk about e-commerce and the need to deliver that 24/7 customer service to those people that want to buy product from you. You don't want to lose that revenue. So typically, in a large majority, companies really can't afford or are dependent on losing very little data or having little data loss. A growing number of these companies and organizations, as it says here, literally never reopen after a significant or catastrophic data loss. And another 25% fail in the following 2 years. You can go on and look that for data centers that I referenced in my last slide that experience a complete failure, the result is significantly worse. FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Organization's part of our Homeland Security today, reported that the majority of prolonged outage results in bankruptcy. So if a data center has lost their data for some period of time, and FEMA says 10 days or more, it results in bankruptcy. And of course, for the rest, there's a certainty of serious financial consequences for literally every hour of outage. And Gartner goes on to validate the consequences of not regaining our data. Even within an hour, upwards of 40% of companies go out of business. So the bottom line here is that disasters are normal. They're going to occur. We're all going to experience them. They come in multiple ways, planned and unplanned, and we all need to be prepared for them. So the real question is, how do we become Jedi IT masters? How do we do that? What's the solution? So how do we weather the storm, be prepared for those Imperial Star Destroyers and their dark forces of data destruction? How do we plan to address disaster recovery and business continuity, at least for your mission critical applications, those applications that we need to have up and operational in a very, very quick way and operate on a 24/7 basis. It starts with an understanding of what downtime costs your company and what the primary risks are. And I'll speak to each of these in a little bit more detail over the next couple slides. Second, your organization, if your organization's under any regulatory or compliance requirements, you really need to understand the length of time that you need to retain your data. So depending on whether it's a HIPAA requirement or SOX or whatever the requirement happens to be, what's the retention time for your particular industry, and how are you going to go about retaining that data in some other mechanism other than just backing it up on every day for the next 10 years, right? So there needs to be a methodology for retention. Where's your data located? Is it located just at a secondary site? Are you backing up just to the cloud? Or do you have a hybrid architecture where you have on-premise, you have local solution as well as an integrated cloud for disaster recovery? It's fairly imperative to ensure that you have your latest data resident locally. It's the fastest way to recover using things like instant recovery for Windows and VMware and Hyper-V, and bare metal recovery in the event that you have a server failure. You can recover very quickly from the majority, 60 to 70, 80% of the failures that you're typically going to have if you're backing up and protecting your latest data locally and then archiving that off to a retention cloud for long-term retention, disaster recovery, and recovery assurance in the event that you have a catastrophic failure, a flood, a fire, a hurricane, or what have you. Additionally, you need to prioritize your recovery objectives for each of those applications. Which ones are critical that need to be recovered within an hour, which are less critical and can take longer to recover. We need to build a plan to go through each application, look at those applications, and based on the assessment that you're going to do on cost and the impact of risk, you can very quickly determine which of your applications are critical and which ones need to have a higher level of recovery assurance. A plan for business continuity really talks about how do I spin up that data quickly, whether it's a server failure or an application failure locally in my facility, my data center on-premise. How do I spin that up using instant recovery or bare metal recovery? Or if I have a catastrophic failure, how do I spin it up at a secondary site or in the cloud and continue my business for those critical applications? We need to build scalability into our plan, right? The explosiveness of data today growing at 40% or better on an annualized basis for most companies, change rates going through the roof. We need to build scalability into that plan. How do we scale? The cloud fits beautifully into that, right? It's elastic in its nature, so it scales very naturally. And if you're archiving your aged data and keeping your local data for maybe 30 days, as well as copying that to the cloud, right? You don't want to just keep your local data local. You want to have it in 2 sites. But keeping maybe 30 days, if that's what your priorities are, locally so you can recover quickly from that, and then offloading that to a retention cloud where you can retain data in a grandfather, father, son type of architecture, that removes the expansive storage requirements that you may have locally, right? Because you're moving that data off as you're continuing to age it and grow it, but you're retaining it for compliance and regulatory requirements. And lastly, and really most importantly here, and where we all fail just miserably in general, is testing. We need to test to validate that our data is good. And I can probably spend the next hour telling stories about lots of companies that thought their data was good, they were backing it up, they were doing all the right things, they never tested it. They never validated it. And it turns out that that data was corrupted, or they had a virus and they were backing up bad data, or the data didn't truly back up at the remote site like they thought that they did. And when they went to retrieve it, it wasn't there. It was gone. So now because they didn't test their data and validate their data and ensure all of those those instant interdependabilities work together, it wasn't there. So it's really critical. We'll talk about methodologies on how to do that and how to easily do it in a cost-effective manner. So the first thing that I talked about in weathering the storm, it starts with understanding the cost, right? The cost of impact of downtime on each application. Don't look at it globally across your entire infrastructure. Look at it on an application by application basis, because that will help you determine which are critical or mission critical that need very, very quick recoverability or recovery time objectives, and I'll speak to what that means and what that's all about, and which you can recover at a longer time and you don't have to spend as much money on it. It really helps you build a very efficient and very cost-effective plan. And it provides you the ability to look at both internal and external applications, internal things like email and ERP and manufacturing applications, critical databases that need to come up fast in order for your employees to continue to operate and do business, as well as externally for customers, websites, e-commerce, and so forth, that also need to come up to protect your reputation or protect your revenue flow. The financial impact analysis allows you to do that. And as I've talked about, in today's 24/7 data access type of environment, downtime costs need to include more than just the loss of productivity or revenue. That's the natural place that we tend to look. They also need to include indirect costs, things like damage to your reputation, loss of customer opportunity, damage to the company brand, and so forth. And we'll take a real brief look at some things that you may want to include in your cost calculations. So this is a bit of an eye chart, and I promise you I'm not going to read it all because, again, we'll spend the next 45 minutes probably doing that. But you can take this away at your leisure, take a look at it, and this gives you some factors that you may want to consider in your calculations, taking into account both direct costs like loss of revenue, loss of inventory, compliance and legal penalties that you may have for not meeting your regulatory requirements. And it also ensures that you include those indirect costs that I just spoke to, loss of business opportunity, loss of customers, right? If you have an e-commerce site, a customer comes to your e-commerce site, it's down. The chances of that particular person, if they've not purchased from you in the past, a new customer, the chances of them coming back are very, very slim. So you've lost a potential new customer because that system wasn't up and operational. The brand damage that you have, if you're offline, again, using e-commerce as an easy example and one that I think that we can all understand. If it's offline for some period of time, your brand is going to be damaged. People aren't going to have confidence and trust in you as a company any longer, and the publicity that goes along with that will be very poor. So while this list that I've included here of things to include and consider isn't inclusive by any means, it does cover some of the key factors that you may want to consider. So downtime cost really has a considerable impact on the business. Again, looking at those same type of surveys that the IT analyst firms have done over the years, and they do them every year, downtime costs business between $90,000 and $300,000 an hour. So it's a lot of money in lost revenue and lost reputation. And the loss to large financial institutions, telecommunications companies, major manufacturers, and energy companies can be significantly higher than that $300,000 that I just spoke to. So as a start, we talked about the financial impact. Now let's take a look at the risk. The next thing that you want to do on weathering the storm is do a risk analysis. We know how much our downtime is going to cost us for each of our critical applications. We want to look at the risk. And the risk of retaining and meeting compliance and regulatory demands and with each application must be part of the disaster recovery solution. So we'll also discuss the understanding of those as we go through here. So as part of our risk assessment, we'll rank our applications based on the impact that they have on the business, right? So from our cost analysis, we can now determine the impact that it's going to have on the business, and we'll start to rank those. And that ranking will help us determine what our recovery time objectives should be. How quickly do we need to get this application back up in operational? What the impact of the data loss is if we lose it for any period of time, or if we haven't backed up data in 24 hours, can we afford to lose 24 hours of data, right? If it's a critical database, the answer to that's probably no. So we'll look at the risk analysis. We'll look at the likelihood of the occurrence based on the figures that I showed in slide 4, right? The causes of system downtime and data loss. And lastly, build an automated recovery solution to address those highest ranked applications where data loss has the most significant impact and risk on downtime and cost and impact to the company itself. So some of the questions that you may want to ask are things that include an evaluation of which critical applications are in use, right? What applications are you using? What's the downtime and data loss tolerance for each of those applications? And you'll be determining this in that analysis and from your cost analysis as well. And when assessing tolerance to the downtime and data costs, make sure that you include those instant interdependabilities that I spoke about for those N-tier applications, right? If it's an email application, there's a database associated with it. There's DNS servers, there's Active Directory. So you need to make sure that all of those are incorporated into the recovery time that is required for that particular email application. And then lastly, what regulatory and compliance requirements is your business bound by? How long do we need to retain data? How often do we need to prove to our auditors that you can recover that data in a timely manner? It's all in the various compliance and regulatory requirements that each of your companies are bound by or have to abide by. So an IT disaster recovery plan needs clear goals. We've been talking about that. Needs those goals and objectives in order to be able to succeed, in order to be able to recover your applications in a timely manner to meet your employees, your customers, and your compliance and auditors' expectations. You need to have those set those goals. And two of those objectives are recovery time objective and recovery point objective. And many on the phone may already have knowledge of this, but for those that do, bear with me a little bit. We'll get through it and move on. But disaster recovery is really about returning operations to a normal state in the event of an outage, or continuing to run in your secondary site or the cloud in the event of a catastrophic site failure. So RTOs and RPOs are needed to set and measure those for each of those applications. Again, they are different depending on what the application is. An e-commerce application is going to have a much shorter RTO and RPO than your file data for, your employees, which you maybe, have a 48-hour RTO or longer. I mean, it's critical to that particular person to get to their data sets, but it's not critical to the business that they get to that in a very immediate amount of time. But it is for email, it is for e-commerce, it is for other ERP type applications. So recovery time objective basically is the acceptable time any application, service, or production system can be unavailable. It just determines how long can you do without this particular application. And it's determined by that cost of downtime and the risk assessment that we just spoke to briefly. Recovery point objective is the acceptable amount of data that you can afford to lose for each application. This really defines the last time that you did a backup or a snapshot of that particular application, right? Is it 15 minutes? Is it every 24 hours? Is it every 3 hours? I mean, you can determine that based on the importance of that particular application. And that really is determined by the amount of data change that you have in an application and the criticality of that application to the business, right? Again, the example of e-commerce in online ordering will have a short RPO, maybe 15 minutes or less, because the data is changing on a regular basis, right? You're not gonna be backing up in the entire application, but its associated data sets and databases, you will definitely be refreshing those on a regular basis. So what's not talked about typically in the industry is the last factor, and this is really the most important factor of all, and that's recovery time actual. And what recovery time actual, you kind of see it on the chart here. It's the difference between the last backup or snapshot and when the system comes back and is operational and accessible by users. It's really defined as the measure of time it takes for all the applications, including those component or those instant interdependencies, to boot and become fully available to the business and to the application users. So how long does it take for this thing to get back up and operational? You want to measure that. That's really going to determine whether you're compliant to your RTOs and your RPOs. So it's an important element. It's not talked about in the industry often. It really requires that automation of testing that we'll be talking about here in order to do that measurement. So what keeps companies from implementing DR plans today? It really boils down to one thing. It boils down to the high cost and complexity of what was in the past manual and infrequent testing. Many organizations still struggle with the skills, the time, the complexity, and the mix of virtual and physical application environments and that high cost of manual testing. And if you look at companies and look at the surveys, literally 3 out of 4 companies are at risk of failing in having an operational disaster recovery plan. One that's tested, one that is in compliance, one that they know they can rely on, have confidence in the event that they either have a local failure or a catastrophic site failure. 3 out of 4 companies, that's a pretty high figure. 60% don't have a DR plan at all, or at least one that's fully implemented and fully tested. And 40% admit that their DR plan didn't prove out to be useful the last time that they had a DR event. So the things that I've talked about to date in doing the assessments, doing the cost analysis, building that plan, understanding your RTOs, your RPOs, your RTAs, are critical to ensuring that you have an operational plan and that your business can continue to operate in the event that you have either a local or a major attack. So back to the story. With the pending attacks of these dark forces of disintegration, the Jedi IT Knights realized that whatever the cause of the outage, assuring recovery and continuity requires a high level of automation and orchestration across different layers of the service stack, from the network to virtual and physical applications. They also realized that older methods of disaster recovery testing, manual methods that are expensive, disruptive, and infrequent, will no longer meet the uptime and regulatory requirements that the Galaxy is operating under today. So today's Galaxy requires DR testing that's application-centric, fully automated, and iterative, a new modern approach to disaster recovery. And that's what we're going to spend the remainder of our time talking about, and give us some time at the end for some Q&A. So the approach is called recovery assurance. It's really having, as the slide says here, complete confidence that the applications will be recovered in the time required to meet the company's IT service demands, compliance requirements, customer requirements, employee requirements. And it incorporates recovery insurance incorporates not only your recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives, but it measures those on a frequent basis so that you always are assured that you're in compliance to those requirements, so that you can have a high level of confidence that if you do have a failure, you have a certified recovery point. It's been tested, it's good, it's saved. That data with all of its interdependencies are saved, and you can point to it and boot right back up from it, point your users to it, and continue in operations. So what it does is it protects data applications and systems to a level that meets business requirements, RTOs and RPOs. It manages business uptime automatically to streamline operations when needed. It automatically tests and certifies backup data, providing that proof, those recovery time actuals, to both internal and external auditors for compliance and regulatory requirements. And it assures the integrity and quality of those critical services during interruptions, whether they're local interruptions, because this runs locally as well as it runs in the cloud, and those catastrophic failures. So you can have assurance that you can operate in either one of those environments. So from Unitrends, recovery assurance is called ReliableDR. Kind of a perfect name, right? It's reliable and it's providing DR. It provides DR testing that's application-centric, fully automated, and iterative. Meaning we're not only testing the data itself, right, certifying that your backup data is valid, we're testing that backup data against a known application and all of the interdependencies of that particular application and their associated data sets are all tested in the means, they're booted up in the appropriate order and assured that they're all within compliance and all can meet whatever your recovery time objectives that you set. That's all orchestrated or configured together, if you will, so that it'll work together. It's fully automated, and you can test that on an iterative basis to ensure that as your data changes, and it will, that your recovery will still be within that compliance. So you can do this both at the primary data center or your primary site and in the Unitrends cloud itself, assuring that you can continue operations no matter what the disaster event happens to be, whether a failure of an application or a failure of a server or a catastrophic failure of your entire site. So ReliableDR features that features tight integration with Unitrends backup software, which is our virtual software that runs on Hyper-V or VMware, and it provides all of our solutions provide data protection across hundreds of operating systems and applications, both physical and virtual. So we're providing protection of the entire environment, no matter what that environment happens to be. So it's integrated with our Unitrends backup software or with our recovery series, which is our hardware appliance that is an all-in-one appliance, software, storage, CPU, networking. It's a plug-and-play solution. You can just plug it onto your network and you're up and operational. And it literally delivers the industry's first automated recovery assurance for physical Windows, VMware, vSphere, and Hyper-V applications. So you can have a mix of applications. It's not limited to just virtual environments. It will automate and test applications and mixed applications, actually, because you may have an ERP application on the physical server and your Active Directory and DNS and web services and some of your databases may be in a virtualized environment. You need the ability to test and orchestrate those together, and this is a solution that can handle both of those environments. So IT administrators now can validate the recovery of those N-tier applications, right? Those applications that have multiple instances across mixed virtual and physical environments, provide automation and orchestration across different layers of the service stack, from the network all the way through those mixed virtual and physical applications, and provide the critical need for which really provides that critical need for those non-virtualized mission-critical physical applications that I spoke about, like an ERP application that may be dedicated to a physical server. So taking a look at it, ReliableDR is tightly integrated into the Unitrends hybrid cloud solution. We provide an end-to-end solution not only to our Unitrends cloud, but we support public clouds as well, AWS, Google, Rackspace, and so forth. But within the public cloud, we can provide storage functions, meaning backup data. You can retain your backup data there or archive within the public cloud. Today, we're not providing disaster recovery as a service. Our recovery assurance, a spin-up of those applications in the public cloud, we're only providing that in the private cloud. And we can talk offline about why that is, but fundamentally it's much more difficult to do it in a public cloud because you need, when you spin up an application, you need to make sure that you have the compute resources of the public cloud available, and SLAs are more difficult to guarantee in that environment unless you dedicate compute resources to your storage resources, and that can tend to get fairly expensive in that environment. So we can control that in our private cloud and keep it down at a very, very reasonable cost. So it provides, in this hybrid cloud environment, we're providing physical and virtual data protection on-premise so that you can back up and protect your data on-premise, recover that data on-premise in instant recovery, bare metal recovery, and those types of applications. Configure the data for deduplication and WAN optimization and encryption. So there's encryption in flight across the WAN. There's encryption at rest on the cloud. There's multi-tenancy on the cloud for security reasons. All of that is integrated and managed by a single screen within the data center itself. So you can manage your entire environment, see it all, see it in real time, and get some real-time feedback on your DR assurance as well, and I'll show you those here in just a second. So what you have in this environment is a total end-to-end data protection and recovery assurance solution, literally for companies of any size. And in the cloud, let me step back just real briefly here. Within the cloud, there's two levels of assurance of recovery. One is disaster recovery as a service, and that's spin up of physical VMware and Hyper-V applications within the cloud, but it's a manual process. You declare the outage, and our cloud team, which is 24/7, 365, will spin up those applications and guarantee you a 1-hour SLA for each of those applications. So it's a means for business critical or less critical applications. It's a means of getting spin up and movement of your users to the cloud, to your applications in the event of an outage. But it's not automated. You're not getting the regular testing. We still do testing, but we do it on a less periodic basis than you do with recovery assurance. So recovery assurance sits on top of disaster recovery as a service. So it's that extra layer that guarantees proof of compliance. So historically, DR has been one of the biggest challenges in IT organizations. Massive amounts of time and resources have been spent ensuring that the primary and dedicated remote sites remain exactly alike in terms of software revisions, patches, and in the best case, those DR scenarios fell short, right? Restores failed to back up, system configuration issues, human error, and so forth. So with the emergence of the cloud and cloud-based recovery, virtualizations, improvements in things like compression and deduplication and WAN optimization, it's really influenced DR best practices and allowed these new standards of application recovery assurance in the cloud to come about. And that's why you're starting to see recovery assurance. You're starting to see disaster recovery as a service as well. So with DR, ReliableDR, for that first time, companies have a unified, affordable recovery assurance solution that automates and assures the recovery process across the heterogeneous IT environment, reducing your risk, decreasing recovery times, and sustaining the business through any outage, planned or unplanned. So let me take you through real briefly here as we roll towards the end what some of the real-time reporting looks like. You'll get real-time reporting on whether your RTOs and RPOs are within compliance. You'll get a dashboard that'll show you that. And recovery isn't successful until a failed application is operational again, as we've talked about, and the users are up and accessing that particular operation. And it's usually not just a single virtual machine, but multiple instances, physical and virtual, working together. So we provide, ReliableDR provides automated testing across those heterogeneous environments. The compliance test can be set up in these jobs so that you can see exactly your mixed environment and whether you're within compliance. You'll get a dashboard that gives you a quick view so that you can see whether they're in compliance or out of compliance. And tests can be scheduled or run manually, and failovers are run on demand. So they will fail over on demand. As soon as you hit a button, it will fail over. And testing is about risk mitigation. That's really the bottom line for doing testing. Understanding risk is never complete without being able to see and track recovery results over time for your auditors, compliance officers, and your key business managers, stakeholders. And ReliableDR provides those easy to comprehend visual dashboards and reports that you can easily send to. You can put them out in PDF or Excel format, send them to your auditors, and they can see that you're within proof of your compliance. So when real-world cost of unplanned downtime are taken into account, recovery assurance is a cost-effective strategy for protecting businesses from any serious injury or outage. And recovery assurance, when you look at it, right, in general, the term of recovery assurance, it shouldn't be hard. It shouldn't be beyond your budget. It needs to be affordable and easy to manage solution that provides significant business benefits to the business of any size. And it should be heterogeneous in nature, so it fits whatever your application happens to be. So let the force be with you. With ReliableDR recovery assurance, you can always awaken your data. And building the plan up front allows you to guarantee and assure that you can awaken that data. So in the last few minutes here before we go to Q&A, let me just take a minute to talk about Unitrends. For those that may not be familiar with the company, I'll do this really briefly. You can go back and look at it. You come to our website at unitrends.com and get a lot more information about our company. We've been in business since 1989, so we're one of the long-term companies in the data protection and data recovery business. We understand it intimately. We've operated across all the operating systems, from the physical operating systems to the virtual operating systems, and we support them all today. We have literally over 14,000 customers and growing worldwide, offices throughout the world, and we sell through a partner channel. So we have an intimate relationship and integration with our partners that have expertise in this area as well, and there are over 8,000 of those worldwide as well. Our cloud, just since we spoke about the cloud, the Unitrends cloud provides well over 10 petabytes of data today and growing. We provide it in two formats: as a no-limit cloud, which is a copy of your backup, or the forever cloud, which is that data retention, the grandfather, father, son, 7 dailies, 4 weeklies, 12 monthlies, and an infinite amount of yearly retention that you can retain in the cloud as long as you need to have it to meet your compliance requirements. We provide also disaster recovery as a service, as well as the application level recovery assurance that sits on top of a disaster recovery as a service. It's all integrated into a hybrid cloud integration with our data protection solutions, so it's easy to manage and easy to use. So I encourage you to go to our website. We have a free copy of our software called Unitrends Free. It literally is a free copy. It's unlimited support of unlimited virtual machines, supports upwards of a terabyte of data that you can retain. There's no time limit on it. It's yours. It's free. Use it. Really see how easy our interface, our user experience is. See the functionality and the capability that we have, and I encourage you to do that. I also encourage you to take advantage of our 50 for 15. It's an opportunity to talk to some experts. Get your questions answered by people that really know, that have been in the business for a long time, that understand the complexity and the problems that you're experiencing, and offer some solutions on how to do it. And we're going to encourage you. We're going to give you a $50 gift certificate for taking that time, because we know your time is valuable. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Karen for some Q&A. My email address is on here. If you have any additional questions, feel free to send me an email, and I'll make sure I get right back to you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much. Lots of great information there. Love the fact that there's a free option for people to try it out. As Mike mentioned, it is time for our Q&A portion of the event. So at this time, we'd like to invite our listeners to ask any questions by using the question box on the left side of your screen. And we've got some great questions coming in, so why don't we jump right in. First question from Ed. Ed says, is the Unitrends Cloud Data Center SSA 16 certified? And is the data center SAS 70 certified?
Yes and yes. The data center is certified. It's Type 2 certified, which is a higher level of certification for the SSAA. I never get that right, 16 certification. But it is certified. That certification is available on our website. And again, there are 2 types, Type 1 and Type 2. Type 2 is the higher level of certification.
Okay, another question here from Hossam. Hossam wants to know, what kinds of recovery assurance can I do in my production environment to ensure that recovery plan is working properly? So he says he's talking about 4 terabytes of data backup daily.
Yeah, it's a great question, and expands on what we talked about. I mainly focused on the cloud when throughout the discussion, but that same recovery assurance runs in your production environment as well. So it's resident in both locations. So you can run ReliableDR within your production environment in conjunction with our data protection solutions, and have automated failover, and assurance that your applications and your data that you're backing up is validated, is certified, and fits those same interdependencies that I talked about in those more complex N-tier applications. So yeah, absolutely, 4 terabytes is fine. I mean, we support hundreds of terabytes in production environments. So we can handle that environment very well, and we can definitely certify your applications locally as well as remotely.
Okay, we have a question here from Nick. Nick says, after a disaster at my primary site and fail over to a cloud DR site, how do I get my data back once my primary site is repaired?
Yeah, great. Thank you for asking that question, by the way. I kind of went by that in my presentation, and it's really a critical question. Everybody that has a cloud-based solution, whether it's just for storage of your data and archive, or whether it's disaster recovery as a service or recovery assurance, this is a key question to ask your vendor that you're talking to. How do you get the data back, right? A large portion of folks out there, you wind up having to move that data back across a WAN, right? Now, sending the data out to the cloud across a wide area network is perfectly fine, right? Especially in our instance, because we have a very efficient level of deduplication. We globally dedupe the data across all the applications, all the data sets are within your data center, and we're only sending the delta changes across that wide area network. We're deduping it, we're compressing it, we're encrypting it as it goes across the network, and we're actually checking out at the site before we send it to ensure that data is not resident out there. But coming back, your primary data center has a catastrophic failure. You've had to rebuild all your servers, your infrastructure in that center. You have no data. So you could easily have 10 terabytes of data. That's a small data center, right, that you need to move back to that primary site. Moving it across a wide area network, even if it's an OC3 or higher line, is going to literally take weeks, if not months, to get that data back. It's not an effective means of getting data from the recovery site back to the primary site. So what we do is, if you're a user of our recovery appliance, we package a brand new recovery appliance, not only with the saved data, all that retained data that you have in the cloud, but also all the changes of the data that have occurred since your catastrophic failure, right? You're continuing operations, you're changing data, you're adding data, and so forth. So all that data is bundled together, put on a recovery appliance, sent back to your site, you plug it into your network, boom, you're up and operational. That's next day, it's there. If you use our software versus the recovery assurance, same functionality, same capability, we just put it on a NAS device, right, on a storage device, send it back to you. Again, you plug it into your servers, where your major storage environment, boom, it's up and operational, and you're good to go. So that's a key question, and I'm glad you asked it. I'm sorry it took a little longer to answer it, but it really is a critical question.
So we're actually at the top of the hour. Maybe we'll go 2 minutes over and take maybe 1 or 2 more questions, if that's okay with you.
I'm good with that. If other people want to hang on, that's great.
Okay, wonderful. So we got a question here from Stan. Stan wants to know, will low latency slow down my whole operation?
Yes. And let me explain that, right? We, nor anybody in the industry, I don't care who you are, whether it's us or anybody else, we can't make data go faster than the speed of light. That's a physics reality, right? I think Newton talked about E equals MC squared, right? It's the speed of light is as fast as you can go. So whatever the pipe is between your primary data center and the cloud is really dependent on the size of data that you need to move across that environment, right? So as you do this assessment, and we'll help you in that that calculation, we'll be able to look at change rate data on your data sets. We'll have a really good feel for the amount of data that you're going to send, and you may have burst, right, at certain times, and you can do that at night and at a later hour if need be. But we'll be able to take a look at how much data you're going to send, and then what size pipe, dependent on how big your change rate is that you need to send over. Initially, we'll seed the data to the data center, just like we send it via hardware back to your rebuilt site. Initially, we package it up either on an appliance or a NAS device or tape or whatever other mechanism that we decide jointly we want to use, and send it to the cloud and build up your data set within the cloud, and do that very quickly, so you don't have to move those huge data sets across the WAN. But there's a lot of calculations out on the website that'll show you how much data you can move across the T1 or T3 and OC3 line, and how big your pipe needs to be, and we can help you in that calculation.
I'm just going to grab one more, and apologies to everyone who asked questions that we just couldn't get to. We just ran out of time. Great questions coming in. This last question, it comes from Liz, and Liz says, we have specific compliance requirements. How can Unitrends provide proof of compliance?
Yeah, well, proof of compliance is that you're meeting the recovery time objectives as well as the retention time requirements of that particular compliance, that particular regulation, whether it's HIPAA or SOX, and there's a litany of others, and they're growing on a daily basis. So say you need to retain data for 10 years, and you need to be able to recover any piece of that data within an hour or say 2 hours of a major event. We can assure that both in two ways. With Forever Cloud, where the data is resident, where you're storing the data on a daily basis, you're replicating your data, you have it stored on your primary site, you may retain 30 days on your primary site, and you're always replicating the data out to the Forever Cloud. And on the Forever Cloud, we're keeping the 7 dailies, 4 weeklies, 12 monthlies, and that 10 years of data in a grandfather, father, son type of architecture. So it's not this huge data set. It's a much smaller data set, but you can pull that back at any time. We assure you that it's there. It's guaranteed that it's there. And then the recovery time with our recovery assurance, you can provide proof to your compliance officers that whatever that data set is that you need to get back to in that application, that it meets your recovery time and recovery point objectives because you've tested it, you certified it, it's there, and it's retained for those 10 years.
Well, thank you so much, Mike, for your presentation. But I am afraid we're out of time. And again, apologies to those that didn't get questions answered. We will make sure you get answers to your questions via email. That said, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today for our special presentation, Recovery Wars, The Data Awakens. I'm Karen Bannon, and on behalf of Mike DiMiglio, Unitrends, and everyone at the Ziff Davis family of publications, thank you for your time and have a great day.